Salutations, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of Macy's Parade in Pop Culture, which now I would consider this an official podcast series, as I would say. And today's episode, we are going to be taking a look inside a book with the ever famous PBS Kids Series, Reading Rainbow, specifically the fourth episode of season 6 and episode 49 in general, Brush. Now, this is, of course, an episode that is most notable because this episode, LeVar Burton visits the Macy's Parade studio, specifically at the time in Hoboken, New Jersey. To go a little insight here, Reading Rainbow, for those who don't know, was a long-running PBS Kids show with 21 seasons and 155 episodes. It first aired on July 11th, 1983, and ended on November 10th, 2006. And I actually did have a remembrance of remembering this episode in particular airing still around the time on PBS Kids. I know it looks a little bit different than what I used to saw during the beginning, but now kind of understanding why, because this was, of course, filmed in, I believe, 1988, I'm guessing, because you can tell why, because they're in the production of the 88 parade, and I'll explain that a little bit more when we go more into the episode. So, yeah. Um, this is definitely an episode I remember. I know there are some other notable episodes in Reading Rainbow that I have seen some clips online, like Kermit the Frog making an appearance, and with Burton being one of the stars on the Star Trek, I believe, The Next Generation, series. They go behind the scenes on the show here. So, in specifically in that episode. So, let's take a look upon the episode itself, specifically. Now, our main story focus for this episode is obviously Brush. Now, this book was written by Per Calderils. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name, but he's from Spain. And like a Spanish author with Spanish illustrations, and there were two English translations, and I think the one we heard in this book, if I'm correct, is the one that was translated in 1986, I believe, because there was one in 1982 in London, but I think this is the one from Brooklyn, where it's about a family had to take away the dog as I think the dog was kind of a little bit not much of a troublemaker, I would say, but not really. But it was such a passion to the kid in like the son of the entire family, and with the dog taken away to another family, he has to think about what to do now, which is really sad that the dog kind of had to be taken away, and he needed to find something to actually kind of make it look like his dog. And up in the attic, he found I think, like an unused brush, and that is almost like a medium-sized brush, and he treats it in his imagination through like a dog. And that's basically like one of the biggest, probably the biggest message when it comes to this episode is the use of imagination. Because not just you have this story, but also with the Parade Studio, the animation segment in this episode, as well as all the three other books that were recommended in the ending. So, hearing this story, it's really heartwarming to see this kid really using his imagination to make this brush come to life. And it really takes into a whole new level. I know it's a kid's book, so I will go a little bit into it. So, yeah, the brush actually does come to life. And although the parents did not believe it at first glance, it wasn't until a robbery incident that got the brush to stop the robber, and they really appreciate it, especially the father petting the brush, and it's amazing that that brush came to life through specifically the love from the child. I forget what the child's name is, but it is definitely a heartwarming story. The illustrations are also pretty decent as well, and every episode there's always like a celebrity or so that does the narration for the story. And in this case, the story was told by Hector Elizondo, who is well known more in the television industry, specifically in the 21st century with shows like Chicago Hope, excuse me, I almost said Chicago Fire, and Last Man Standing. So this is like one of his fewest roles that he didn't really get big in the bigger entertainment industry. I know he was in a couple of films I see in, but he's more of a television star rather than a movie star. But not really a name, a big list celebrity name that you would think of. But he does, I believe, has an Hispanic heritage, a Puerto Rican native. So like his parents are specifically. So he does have a bit of a Spanish heritage, which makes sense for him to do the narration for this story, which I think was a great choice for him to do so. Let's talk about the rest of the episode before we get into our main aspect of the episode specifically. So, one of the most notable things that the use of imagination can also do is for creativity in any way, shape, or form, which in this case, we visit an animation studio. Not really big from what I did through my research. It's a very small studio that I don't think wasn't around. It was called, I did look at the credits. It was called 180 Productions, if I'm correct. And no, yeah, 180 Productions. It wasn't. I don't know much about the studio, but one of the animators, I believe, was named Becky Wilby, and yeah, Becky will, because there's actually a little blog post she has on a website called Excelamation, um, that she did appear on Reading Rainbow, and they kind of talked about their creativity through animation by doing, of course, sketches first for design and then do the animation. And they called it a different technique, but in today's standards, that is called stop motion, because they use clay as a lot of material and kind of teach a little animation on how they had to deal with the stop motion, whether it be through a dinosaur through in a book or a frog going through a unicycle. And it is kind of like giving me that almost like Will Vinton style for this animation studio that wasn't really big, but like specifically these animators, and just bringing like something unique and like showing how to bring dinosaurs or frogs to life. And there was even a couple of discussions with kids of what they want to see come to life. And I know that I also had the same thing as well, because in my childhood I had two blanket bears that I had as a kid, and I kind of had them come to life. Like, I think we can all agree when we were kids, stuffed animals, we kind of bring them to life because they are like either a friend or, in this case, for some of you, their child, I would say, because I would consider my the bears I had when I was a kid my kids, I would say. Um, yeah, that's very interesting, and I actually still have those bears um, with me in my house for memorabilia. It's just a precious childhood memory I had for bringing those my two bears to life in my imagination. Now let's talk about the other three books that were recommended in the episode. One of the most notable ones that was recommended was Jumanji. Yeah, uh, before the movies, Jumanji was one of the recommended books. That is kind of a surprise. The other ones were What the Mailman Brought, which is about basically animals, specifically every day a different sort of animal is the mailman. And then one is just basically a how-to book, which is called Egg Carton Zoo, where you just show you how to craft animals made out of completely out of egg cartons. That is something you don't usually see, but it would be interesting if people knew, like in today's standards, would actually still make egg cartons, like animals out of egg cartons. That would be very. That's something you don't usually see, like, because obviously with technology nowadays, it's like you basically just have like either a iPad or a tablet or an iPhone or a laptop or anything like that. But going back into like when technology was still not really advanced, and even I know one of the kids said they want to bring their computer to life. Um, it is nice like to hearing some things that, like, if a person would answer what they want to bring to life, they would just, I don't know if they would say anything technology wise, but it is nice that like there is still like some memories of like bringing old stuff, like some things to life that you would never think of today's standards, like an egg carton, for example, or I would say uh, like a bottle, or say like any sort of water bottle. I don't know why I said water. Um, and there's a lot, even model trains you can easily bring to life. And I think that's another thing. Like you just feel like you're running your own railway and stuff like that. And I think many Thomas and Friends collectors have their imaginations of creative storytelling in when they're merchandising in form like that. Now let's talk about the main centerpiece of the episode, and that is the Parade Studio, which was some time for a while, I think, in either, like most notably in the 1980s through 2010, the studio was in Hoboken, which is still, the studio is still in New Jersey specifically, but since 2011 through now, it's in Moonachie. And it is interesting that hearing the from, I believe, the Travel Channel documentary, that it used to be, I think, a Hershey's factory, I believe, or some sort of chocolate factory. I think it was a Hershey's one, as seen in that Travel Channel documentary. And Macy's Parade Studio took that over until 2010, before they relocated to Moonachie in a much bigger studio. As you can see, the warehouse obviously really small when you compare that to the size of Moonachie's studio today, but that's how it was. So obviously in the opening segment we get to see a little bit of the Doodlebug head right behind LeVar, and hearing the sounds of the mechanics from the fiberglass or paper mache characters that Manfred Bass did when he became the official head designer for the Macy's Parade from 1966 all the way up to the year 2000. He made some creative, notable inventions for floats to make them a bit more entertaining with the balloons to make it even, and obviously creating stuff like that Doodlebug. And the most notable one he created was, of course, Tom Turkey. And obviously, in the footage we see from Tom, obviously it's the very first design. I will admit, my thoughts on these still to this day in the first version of Tom Turkey, like his original paint design is just so weird. It's just so weird. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the face. I don't know. I think it's just the use of color. It's just like the colors they chose that doesn't really fit in today's standards. I think my favorite painted version of Tom is the one from 93 all the way up to 2017. Even though it's still, I believe, still the same mechanic of Tom since the very beginning, because he's like the oldest float ever in the parade. I think just really paint modifications and maybe mechanic modifications, because I still think there are 6 people that are still in Tom, I believe, as of today, still making all of his head, his wings, his eyes up and mouth up and down, as still to this day, I believe. And just hearing the sounds of how they actually sound when you don't hear crowds going through the parade route, or unless if you're on the float itself, Tom, like, it sounds weird. Like, it's just odd to hear that, the sounding of Tom Turkey, what he actually sounds like without a crowd like around the parade route. It's just like you don't usually hear that, and mostly you hear the music a lot, and on the floats specifically when they're marching down the parade route. And then, of course, we see a little bit of the New York Daily News float on how more creativity of using imagination, like with the flowers coming up. And then, of course, the big centerpiece of all is the kind of making of the Snoopy balloon, which obviously we show a little bit of the design of the 1987 balloon, since I believe this was filmed in early 1988. And the big evidence is because they just did the Quick Bunny clay mold, the clay model they did. And that is something I think the studio used to do. I don't know if they don't do that anymore, because I think the 3D printing, I believe they do on all the balloons now. That was a main tradition that Manfred Bass, and then even throughout most of John Piper's era, specifically for the balloons, make a clay model and then make a mold to make a hard model, and they even sometimes paint the hard model. They might even but I know in nowadays they make a painted model, um, and for the painter designs, and then they make yards and yards of fabric, which they still do to this day, and of course inflated with helium, and I think that armature was probably the early design for the second version of the Snoopy on skates version that Woodstock would come along with that adventure, and it was just nice to see how they obviously make a balloon. Obviously, the only other parade other than event about it was obviously the History Channel documentary that really shows how they make the balloons. Um, and maybe the Travel Channel one, but more specifically, Reading Rainbow's Brush episode and the TV, the History Channel one. And then, of course, one thing to end off, obviously, to continue with the imagination, I forgot. I almost wanted to. I didn't thought of saving this for last, but obviously, you end off with a puppet, specifically done and made by Kevin Clash. Of course, the famous Muppeteer that would be known as the OG Elmo, as many people would know him. Although some controversies had unfortunately kind of lost a little bit of his reputation, but he really showed us how he made the puppet, and even LeVar kind of had done his own playing with his own version of the puppet that was made for him since it was a LeVar puppet. And it's just really weird. I don't know if it's just because LeVar talking to himself, the LeVar puppet, or specifically Kevin Clash's appearance. Even though that controversy has been kind of faded a bit, but it's still like, it just ought to see that, in my personal opinion. And I think that kind of wraps it up. I really think this is definitely one of the best episodes of the show. I know it's not like, I've not watched all the episodes, of course, but this is an episode that definitely really brings the message of imagination and even creativity, whether it be through the mediums of like books of storytelling, as we've seen in the story Brush, and even bringing an actual brush to life through the story, or all the other books that were recommended, or obviously through animation through the realms of stop motion or puppetry from Kevin Clash's puppet, or of course designing floats and balloons in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade is always a big deal. This is definitely one of the best episodes, I would say, for sure. The next episode, we are going to be starting up in the double Macy's Parade NBC related content episodes, prime time wise. As we'll be starting with a couple of 6 friends to be precise. I think I already kind of gave it away, but let's just say Underdog has gone away.